Black Lives Matter organization, the Me Too movement, all of those were formed by young people in their 20s and 30s. And I don't agree with their politics frequently, but I celebrate the fact that they're in the arena. They're fighting for what they think America's future should be. That's healthy in a democracy.
Welcome to On Brand with Donny Deutsch. I am Donny Deutsch, and this is the podcast dedicated to a simple premise that everything and everybody today is a brand. Every athlete, every celebrity, every corporation, every company, every movement, every religion, everything is a brand. A brand is a set of values. And what we do here is two things. First, we do we interview a big personality about their own brand. Today, it's David Gergen. David has been a senior advisor to 4 presidents. Head CNN analyst. He's got a new book out that is just fantastic that we're going to talk about. He has seen it all, but we're going to get into our brands of the week. That's the other thing that we do here, which is basically which brands are up, which brands are down, the zeitgeist, who's driving which way. And let's get right into it now. First brand of the week is the hearings for the January 6th the TV ratings for the hearings for January 6th. And, you know, a lot of people were like ballyhooing, and it's a brand down. We're ballyhooing the ratings that there was 20 million the first night. Now, forget that they've dropped way off. They dropped to 10 million the second night, and during the day, they really fall off a cliff. But even that 20 million, on any given night, if you combine the people who are watching the evening news, ABC, NBC, and CBS, they draw about that same number. So all I'm saying is on the average news night, the same amount of people are just watching the news. So yes, when we compare it to the World Series and other things, but when you aggregate it, and these numbers are aggregated because it was on MSNBC, it was on CNN, it was on networks, it was on Fox Business News. Of course, Fox didn't run it on regular Fox News because they're Fox. But the numbers have not been that fantastic. And it begs the question, what are these going to accomplish? Now, these had to and have to happen because history needs to record this. It needs to record the visuals. It needs to record the words. This is critical. And it may swing a few voters, you know, here and there. It's obviously the diehards on either side, it's not going to move, but some of the independents, so it could swing a couple of points, and which would make a huge difference. And of course, you've got Merrick Garland and the Department of Justice watching. So, you know, all in all, obviously they need to have happen, but I don't think it's a juggernaut as far as TV go. Brand down for Joe Biden riding a bicycle. And we've all seen that image at this point. And, you know, obviously things happen. He just fell off the bicycle and whatnot. But it's certainly not good for him because this is I know it seems it's a small incidental thing, but there's a reason that Putin posts pictures of him bare-chested on a horse, right? You know, it's one more instance of him not looking strong. And his age. And, you know, this is, you know, Gergen talks a lot about this in my interview today, but that, you know, our leaders, and this is, of course, Trump also, and Biden, and Pelosi, and Schumer, and McConnell, that, you know, he's one of the people talking honestly that as people get into their late 70s and early 80s and mid 80s, they lose their fastball. They just do. I'm sorry. You know, if you're somebody who is at that age or has parents of that age, and this is not ageist, this is just a fact that an 80-something is just not as on their game as a 40-something or a 50-something or a 60-something. And the problem with Biden running for a second term is not that he's going to be 82 if he gets elected. He's going to be 86 while he's still in office. And Trump will, of course, be 83 also. And the age thing is an issue. There needs to be fresh blood in Washington across the board. There just does. Brand down for God. It's terrible. I mean, you can't give God a brand down. So we're not going to say that. We're going to say brand down for people that believe in God. Much better. Because we can never give God a brand down. Of course not. The vast majority of U.S. adults do believe in God. It's 81%, but that's dropped significantly. That's 6 points from 2017. And between 1944 and 2011, more than 90% of Americans believed in God. So 17% of Americans saying they do not believe in God now. And, you know, still most people do, but that's a sizable chunk that don't. And that's kind of sad. I believe in God. I believe in a greater being. I believe religion is also is the cause of all strife in the world. You know, if you go back to every core fight, it's about religion, because the rituals of religion, no one can be right and wrong. You can't take Judaism or Buddhism or Catholicism and say one is right and wrong. So obviously the rituals which make up the religions, they are what they are. Because does that mean they can't be right? Because that means a chunk of religions are wrong. So God's not the problem. It's the ritualistic stuff of various religions that cause men, I don't mean men, I mean mankind to fight. So that's a 5-hour discussion for another day. Brand out for TikTok. Leaked audio from 80 internal TikTok messages shows the U.S. user data has been repeatedly accessed from China. For years, TikTok has responded to data privacy concerns by harnessing the information gathered about users in the United States is stored in the United States. Well, it seems as if leaked memos going back and forth. No, it's access from people in China. So here we have right now the most important, fastest growing social media platform in the U.S. where the information is available to China. Not a good situation. We've got to do something about that. Brand down for raises. Okay, here's the good news. That the average wage increase was 6.1% last year. Woohoo! Well, prices are going up at 8.6%. So pretty much consumers are losing about 3% a year of their real spending ability. And that's a problem. That's why we have this problem in the economy right now. But it's really interesting. Wages are going backwards. There's no other way of shaking it. So if you got that 6% increase last year, you got 3% less to spend. And that sucks for everybody. It really, really does. Brand up for Paul McCartney, turning 80, just turned 80 on June 18th. He celebrated his 80th birthday by singing Glory Days with Bruce Springsteen. This goes against everything I said in my earlier text about people aging, but there's a difference between an entertainer and somebody making decisions on behalf of the free world. There just is a difference between, not that singing songs isn't hard and you need to have your physical acumen, but you don't have to have the same mental acumen. I don't think you do so I don't know. That's going to be controversial, but whatever. But he celebrated his 80th birthday by singing Glory Days with Bruce Springsteen on Thursday at MetLife Stadium. Bon Jovi brought up a fistful of balloons to celebrate his birthday. And like several other members of I Hope I Die Before I Get Old generation, including Dylan, the Stones, Ringo, they all keep working. And that's great. But let's contrast that with being president of the United States. Big difference singing Hey Jude at 80 versus making decisions about nuclear weapons at 80. So that's all I got to say on that one. Brand up to cricket, the sport of cricket. Now, here you go. You ready for this one? It is the world's second most valuable league according to TV rights. National broadcast rights for the upcoming 5-year cycle of the Indian Premier League have sold for $5.6 billion. Now, in the aggregate, that's not the biggest number, but when you go right get down to a per game, after the NFL, it tops the English Premier League at $11 million. It tops baseball. It tops basketball. Now, of course, there are more games in those leagues, but when you go, what is a television paying per rights per game after football, ahead of soccer, is cricket. There you know. There you go. Who knew? Cricket. Okay, brand up for The Joker 2. There's a lot of rumors that the hit movie The Joker, which of course, what's his name? Once again, this seems to be a theme for today's show. I'm having a senior moment. Joaquin Phoenix, who of course played the Joker brilliantly. Supposedly there's a Joker 2 that's going to be a musical, and Lady Gaga is rumored to be in it. It's the working title is called Faladu, which is Joker 2. And supposedly she's going to play Harley Quinn, his psychiatrist at the Arkham Asylum mental institution, who falls in love with him and becomes his sidekick and partner in crime. I'm all for it. Let's go. I'm ready. Okay, and a huge brand up for Ryan Gosling. Now, he set the internet on fire. They released images of him, the first images of him as Ken in the Barbie movie. I've given a brand up to the Barbie movie in the past before. That Barbie, a live action movie starring Margot Robbie as Barbie, Ryan Gosling as Ken. I mean, can't get better casting than that. And in the movie, it's a live action movie. They play the Barbie's kind of kicked out of Barbie Land because it's just a really interesting movie, an adult movie, if you will. And if you got to go online and see these images of Ken, because I'm going to sound creepy saying this, got his body kind of greased up, so he's wearing shirtless with a vest, so he looks like he's plastic, and he looks like the real life Ken. You got to give it to Ryan Gosling, handsome fella. I mean, he's my type. He really is. I'm straight, but he'd be my type if I wasn't. Can I say shit like that? Yeah, I can say shit like that. And here's an interesting one. Brand down for novelist James Patterson. He apologized for saying older white men experience another form of racism. He said the best-selling crime mystery novelist apologized for saying that white men are kept from writing jobs due to racism. Here's the quote. Can you get a job? Yes, it's harder. Yes, it's even harder for older writers. He told Sunday Times, you don't meet many 52-year-old white males. He got in trouble with that. It's interesting. There is a reality. Look, I see it in television, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It is much harder now, and well, it should be. The pendulum has swung for a male of a certain age, a white male, to get a job, then a minority, then a woman, then a younger person, and that makes sense. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I don't think it's. I don't know why you can't say it. That's the pendulum has swung, and it needs to swing. And white males and older white males have had every benefit throughout history, and now they don't, and that's fair. And I'm one of those guys, and so there you go. That's an interesting. So James Patterson, you can't say that stuff, but it am what it am. So those are our brands of the week. Let's get to our interview with David Gergen. I am thrilled with today's guest, David Gergen. David's got a new book, Hearts Touched with Fire: How Great Leaders Are Made. It's already a New York Times bestseller, his second one. He's, of course, former presidential advisor to Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, Gerald Ford, Bill Clinton. He is senior political analyst for CNN. He is a professor of public service, the founding director of the Center for Public Leadership at Harvard Kennedy School, and just one of kind of the smartest guys of all time. Welcome, sir.
That's setting a low bar.
The book is,
I'm good, Donny.
The book is,
I'm glad to talk to you.
Wonderful and timely. And kind of the essence is kind of the thesis behind it is the old guys got to get out of the way and let the new leaders come in and take over. You do a kind of profiles and courage of everybody from Harvey Milk to Ruth Bader Ginsburg to John Lewis to JFK to Lincoln. And why have we found ourselves currently where the president is, if he runs again, will be 82. The guy who's probably going to run against him will be pushing 80. Or Nancy Pelosi's in her early 80s. Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell. I keep listing. Why is this the first time that the younger bucks are not pushing through?
Well, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure I have the answers to why. I do know the answers to sort of what I think should happen, and that is, the older generation really should be preparing to leave the stage, as other older generations have done in the past. There's nothing new about that, but it is really a question of whether you're going to follow it or not. And in older generations, people typically left government service in their 60s, maybe early 70s. In corporations around America, you find that CEOs are expected to step down around 65, 67, and many step down a lot earlier than that. And here we have a situation, as you just mentioned, Donny, that we have potentially a Trump versus Biden runoff here in the presidential election of 2024. And if that's the case, one of them, whoever the winner is, will be trying to govern when he's in his 80s. We haven't seen anything. Even Ronald Reagan was not that old when he was, in his second term. His age was beginning to take a toll, but he wasn't that old. He was younger than these guys would be. And I really do think it's time to pass the baton. For the older generation should stay on board, helping the younger generation govern, providing advice, providing philanthropic support, working with nonprofits, all the different kind of things we still need to do in our society. Older folks can do those kinds of things. But in terms of running the White House, the most complex and most powerful organization in the world, in terms of trying to run the Congress when you have so many people who are beyond the normal ages of retirement, it just makes governance much, much tougher and more problematic. So I think, the appropriate thing to do is to step back and bring forward, and let's cultivate and see who's in that younger generations and Generation X or even millennials or Generation Z, who's ready for leadership now? Who can we prepare for leadership down the road?
I've talked very often on TV that, Biden's numbers are ridiculously low and shouldn't be as quite low as they are. And I've often said a lot of it has to do with just his lack of mojo up there, that he comes across without saying like an old guy. And you've even talked about, you've been very open about yourself that at your age, you don't have the same quite step and you lost a little off your fastball. And I think that really, really hurts Biden.
I think it's already hurting him. I think you're absolutely right. A friend told me yesterday they'd seen him walking toward a platform in the last couple of days with sort of mincing steps as if he, were having a hard time navigating. I imagine that's probably not the case, but a lot of people imagine that to be the case. We're at a time when we have so many crises coming at us so quickly. We need strong leadership. We need leadership that is, that's compelling, that brings the kind of bravery, say, that Zelensky has brought forward in Ukraine. But leadership that's also wise. And I just don't. I think when you're as you mentioned, I just turned 80, and I can just tell you from personal experience. I think I can do things. I can be helpful on the sidelines and be helpful in working with young candidates and that sort of thing. But I shouldn't be running a large, complex organization, especially, I think, in the White House. People should realize how many issues come before a president that are very close calls that require acute judgment, a real sense of the context, the terrain in which the person is trying to govern. And when you're in your 80s, you just don't have that sharp judgment anymore. And it's not there's anything wrong with you. It's just age takes its toll. And why should the country be in a situation where we're not going to know for the next, let's just say we elect somebody in their 80s. We're going to spend the next 4 years thereafter wondering if that person's going to be able to get out of bed the next day and be up to the job. And I don't think we should be in that kind of vulnerable position.
Power is taken usually. It's not really given. And so is part of the issue that there is not the young bench out there that, people always say to me, the Democrats, who are the up and coming Democrats? Who are the up and coming Democrats? Yeah. And is it this more of an issue that the older folks are not letting go, or the younger ones are not there to grab the reins?
Well, I do think the younger ones are, for the most part, there to grab the reins. They obviously have to be tried out. But I think that, let's say Biden decides after the midterms, he did somebody else really, or another team should take over and run in 2024, that there are people out there, especially governors, who've had the kind of executive experience that proves to be helpful in the White House. Some of our best presidents, like Franklin Roosevelt and indeed Ronald Reagan, were executives before they became president. They knew how to run organizations. And governors now, say Governor Whitmer of Michigan, or the Governor Raimondo, who has been here in Rhode Island nearby, where I'm speaking to you from. There are a number of people like that. And the Washington Post just had a big piece here in the last 24 hours that there are over 15 different people who might want to run for president if you take like a DeSantis and Abbott and on the Republican side. Now, are they the right people? Are they going to be good people? Well, there's a risk. Whoever we elect, there's something of a risk, isn't there? But I think the risk is much bigger with someone in their 80s than it is with somebody in their 50s or 60s.
You mentioned the word risk. We're going to get back to the book in a second, but just sidebar for a minute. You spoke very openly about this, as many of us have, that we are in such a fragile territory. Our democracy is really in play right now. That to me, it's the most frightening thing. And what's happening in the state legislatures right now, it's being teed up. It's actually, I could give you an argument that it's not only a possibility, it's a probability. Our democracy is in peril. And how did we get here? Something that we so took for granted is in play. How have we gotten here?
That's a really, really tough question, and I think historians will be puzzling over that for a long, long time. I have a generational theory that I think is is a significant part of the problem, and that is that we for the first, coming out of the World War II, when we had, beaten back the Great Depression and secured a victory against one of the toughest military machines we've ever seen, or toughest machines, and both the Nazis and the Japanese. But we came out of that war in 1945. Not only did we have a ton of babies, but there was a real can-do spirit in the country, and there was a sense that we can do whatever we set our minds on doing, which was true at that time. And we were considered a great nation. And I thought the World War II generation governed, for the most part, extremely well. The World War II generation of those people who were sort of born before the war, came of age during the war, were enormously shaped by the military experience. We had 7 presidents, starting with Jack Kennedy and later on through George H.W. Bush. 7 presidents, both sides of the aisle, and they were a terrific generation. They were not perfect. They gave us Vietnam and Watergate, which were big deals, of course. But overall, they left behind a country that was very well governed, a country that was the strongest when they left the stage in the early 90s. America was the strongest nation since the days of ancient Rome. That's who we fashioned ourselves after. We were the strongest politically, economically, militarily, culturally. That was a tremendous legacy for people who followed. And I always put the World War II generation up on a pedestal. They were running things when I first came to Washington, and I fell in love with these guys, mostly guys, more women now, obviously. But I thought they did wonderful things for the country, and the country was in good hands. When they started leaving the stage, however, we left the country to the baby boom generation, who started flowing in positions of power and authority in the 90s. And I had first had serious hopes for the baby boomers, but I increasingly became disappointed with their performance. One of the reasons I came north to Harvard to teach was I thought it would be spending time with young people who had real promise, serious promise. And they did, and I was very blessed to be among them. And they have given me hope about the long-term future. But in the meantime, we have this issue of what about the baby boomers? And I think it's time for the baby boomers to start stepping back, and let's turn to Generation Z to get them more involved. That's the generation that was born between 1965 and 1980. They're in their prime now, and many of them feel they've been overlooked, that they have been sandwiched, in effect, by the World War II on one side and then the millennials coming on another. So they deserve a time at bat, and I think that they'll be a great bridge into the future. But again, the long-term future rests heavily upon how well we prepare millennials and Generation Z for lives of service and lives of leadership. And those are not things easy to come by, but they're vitally necessary. America needs more Zelenskys of our own.
Why you mentioned that kind of you showed up and the boomers were kind of disappointing. And man, it's hard to kind of generalize an entire generation, but
well, I think one of the big differences between the two generations, and let me go back to the war point. The World War II generation, when I came to Washington, because of the World War II generation, about 75% of the people who were in Congress had military experience. Yeah. They had fought under the same flag as each other. They tended to they worked well together. They respected each other. So you had a good operating
and they understood service,
basis.
Selflessness.
Yeah, and now how much do we have? How many people have military service who are running for office? Maybe we have in the Congress maybe 13, 14%. It's come way down, replaced by people who've never had service. And I don't think the baby boomers just don't have service in their bones for the most part. It's they came up with a lot of innovation. The things were changing. The big excitement was in Silicon Valley, but it hasn't been about public service. And we desperately need more people who can fill these major roles and are better prepared for them. I do think the 90s was a turning point. When you had Newt Gingrich come in and capture the House of Representatives, it changed the whole culture of the House of Representatives over time. And then a lot of people who got newly elected to the House began running for the Senate, and he brought these poisonous divisions we see today, they brought them into the Senate. And we've been having trouble governing ever since. We've had, just to put a fine point on it, we've had, since the World War II generation, since George H.W. Bush left the stage, we've had 5 presidents. Not a single one has had military service.
Yeah,
they just don't come from that milieu. I think service is when you're young. It can be military, but it can also be civilian service. Mm-hmm. Is this great stepping stone to more effective leadership. Doesn't solve your problems. You can still have people who are bad guys, who are mad or whatever. But it would take us a long way there, and I think the country would be in better hands.
Leadership, obviously the book is all about leadership, and you talk about inner journeys and outer journeys of the various leaders. Talk to me about what those designations mean.
It goes back to this whole question, are leaders born or are they made? And increasingly we realize that if you have some leadership instincts when you're young, you can build on those, but basically leaders are self-made. And that really so that requires, if they're self-made, how do we prepare people for that? And the general view now within the leadership literature is that the early part of your career ought to be about learning who you are and learning, to gain self-awareness, to have a pretty candid understanding, and not BS yourself about who you are and what you can do, and then form your values, begin to set up your value set. And that is, in effect, to establish what your true north is as a human being. What values will you navigate toward? And that's what we mean by going from self-awareness to self-mastery. Does that make a difference? Well, let me just say, Donny, that when I came to Washington by chance, my first president was Richard Nixon, and I was just a young kid in his administration, in his White House administration. And much of what I saw in Nixon those early days when I first went to the White House was a man who was a startling good strategist. He and Henry Kissinger, had a capacity to look farther back because they were sort of amateur historians. They loved biographies and that sort of thing. And Richard Nixon, I thought, was the best strategist that I've ever met in public life. The guy who could go up figuratively on a mountaintop and look back, 20, 30, 40 years and could look forward. And, the idea that working for a guy who's with Kissinger, they used to argue who were the best generals in World War I. So they really did have a sense of history, and that made a big difference. So, but if that was all there was to Richard Nixon, he would have actually been a pretty good president.
Yeah.
But as we're celebrating again, or at least marking the occasion of Watergate a half century ago, that certainly wasn't all there was to Richard Nixon. He also had a dark side, and he had demons inside him that he knew were there, but he had never learned to control. He had a set of grievances in general, and he felt that basically, if you weren't with him, it means you must be against him. And he put people into black and white situations, when in fact, of course, much of life is lived by people in gray situations. But Nixon didn't have that inner mastery that you need, and the demons eventually brought him down. When he was interviewed by David Frost, the British journalist, Nixon said, and was asked what really happened in Watergate. Nixon said, "I gave my enemies a sword, and then they ran me through." And that captured it pretty darn well.
Yeah.
So that's the early part of the journey. Then, after you sort of have the whole argument of the book is after you sort of begun to understand who you are, formed your own true north, begun to deal with your self-mastery, you then are much better prepared to get into the arena and work with others. You're going to be trying to learn how to lead upward. A lot of us spend our time, serving as staff. I spent over 20 years as various staffs, which, I appreciated doing that, but I realized I was junior and I was working my way up, and you sort of had to pay your dues. But I tried to learn how to manage presidents. How do you advise a president, persuade him to take a view that might not be so popular, but really would be the right thing to do, and how much damage is he going to suffer as a result? Those things are important to be able to know how to manage up. But you also gradually, if things break your way, you turn out to be asked to lead teams. And then team leadership is different from leading yourself. It's a lot of things about how you have to have the understanding of the whole context in which you're appearing, and why and how. If things are hard when you get up and manage a team, they get progressively harder. But that's what we call an outward journey. How do you work with? What's the dynamic you have with others who may be either your superiors or your peers? Or you could be working even outside. You got your team, but you have to learn to work with another team. It's in a different organization. It's in a different place, and you're sort of learning how to collaborate. Those are the kind of skills that one needs to be a full leader. You start out, worrying about yourself, but you wind up worrying about your followers and what you can do and helping them have a more enriching lives.
Something I found in my business career working with a lot of Fortune 50 CEOs and people in powerful positions is that they're all thirsty for honesty, people around them.
Yeah.
Just give them straight talk. And you, as somebody who, from a myriad of personalities and presidents, were in that position where you had to speak truth to power. Is there any formula? Is there any, you're sitting there and you're sitting with Nixon, you're sitting with Clinton, you're sitting with the most powerful person in the free world, and you've got to kind of serve up to them I disagree with you,
You do.
sir. You're wrong.
You do.
Is it?
Yeah.
What's the playbook there? I know there's not a playbook, but just take
Okay.
me
Well,
inside.
one thing you'll probably find this as a surprise, but I think you ought to have a little money in the bank. I think you ought to have 2 or 3 months of rent you can pay, because if you start speaking truth to power, if you speak conscience to power, which I've come to believe is really the essential issue, or you're going to go talk to your boss about what's right and wrong, there's a good chance you're going to be thrown out on your tail and be seen as like you're either weak or you're not really on the team, you don't believe, and your days of advising presidents may be quite short. And you just have to be prepared for that. If you really want to be helpful, though, you do need to be able to be willing to say conscience to power, but also have that, have a couple of months' rent that you can do that. That's women especially need to understand that, because men for a long time have protected themselves by saving up a little bit, having a little money in the bank, and then having some more freedom as a result. And women have tended to be a little more subservient. They're now coming into their own, thankfully. Women were often worried, I don't want to become a bag lady. They'd see that woman, you're going into the grocery store, there'd be a bag lady down there on the steps, and a woman would tell herself, I just don't want to be that way. And what happened was that a lot of people stayed in the positions they didn't want to be in, but they didn't have the capacity to walk out because they had to maintain and pay the rent. And that's a tough situation, but you need to be prepared for, if you're really going to go against the grain. It's much, much easier to go with the grain when you're inside. Oh, we're all on the same team and so forth. What you get from that is groupthink, and groupthink is very dangerous for a team, because people aren't open to the realities and the tough realities. They want to see things more optimistically than they truly are, and that's what gets presidents into trouble. When Joe Biden suddenly thinks of himself as he's the new Franklin Roosevelt, and Roosevelt had a margin of 60, 70, 80 votes when he went for big things, and Biden's got a margin of like 2. It's just much harder to govern, and you don't want to oversell or overpromise the public. And I think that's been part of Biden's problem, is that he keeps suggesting that he's got answers to all the world's problems, and yet world's problems get worse. And I think that has been one factor in his increasing difficulty in governing.
You were a Republican most of your life. You now are an independent. You declared a few years back. And
I was actually an independent most of my life, but that's all right.
Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me. I thought you were a Republican.
No, it's fine. I was more liberal than let's say Reagan, but I also thought he was a good president, and I was honored to work for him.
I've asked this question of a lot of guests, and I understood Trump the first time around, how people were willing to take a flyer. He was different. He was new. They were. What still stuns me is that after watching 4 years of that act, 40% of this country, close to half of this country said, yeah, give me more of that. That's what I want. You've watched us morph into different forms. Explain that to me. Explain how Donald Trump, and now Trumpism, lives in such living color.
Well, I think it's one of the hardest questions we'll ever face, and we are moving toward Trumpism. And we have not only Donald Trump still here and very active and the most likely nominee in his party at this point, but he has paid some price since. I mean, there's been a diminishing of the stars, not quite as bright as it was when Trump got elected, say, for people in the middle. I think a lot of people in the middle now sort of said, well, we've had it with Trump. But right behind Trump now, we do see the rise of Trumpism, as you say, and it's especially, I think, obvious to everybody that Governor DeSantis of Florida, Governor Abbott of Texas, but especially DeSantis, is emerging as an alternative to Trump, as sort of a smart, safe Trump.
Which is scarier in some ways, frankly.
It's a wolf in sheep's clothing. Scarier in some ways because, in truth, I remember back in the 60s, we used to tell each other, George Wallace is a real threat if he ever takes power. But what we really should worry about is a smart George Wallace emerging, because a smart autocrat can really destroy democracy. Mm-hmm. They know how to pull the levers. I never thought Trump had the capacity to really govern well, because he wasn't that good at it, and the people he surrounded himself with were not that good at it. And so they didn't have a very effective presidency. but Trumpism lingers on, and there is a real possibility Donald Trump could be our next president. I think you're going to find, just the reverberations of that are going to be pretty strong. I mean, the Canadians may build a wall to keep out the Americans. But I do think we're coming to, Donnie, to a really important 3, 4, 5 years. They can be very, very rough. I think these next 5 years could be even rougher than what we've had over the next 6 years. I mean, we're going to be coming through these midterms because they could be very jarring. Republicans can well take over the House and maybe even the Senate if this inflation keeps up. And then you're going to have 2 years with Biden in the White House, presumably, but with a Congress which is anything but ready to do its bidding. But many people will want to sink him from there. So you'll have those rough 2 years, and then you're going to have. I don't think there's an obvious person to be the next president. As I say, there are people like some of the governors who are coming up on the Democratic side, and Republicans will tell you they think DeSantis. You talk to Republicans in Florida, he hangs a moon there, and that's a big state. He's been an effective person. There's a little essay in Time magazine about DeSantis, written by Jeb Bush, who was a very strong middle of the road type, center right kind of person, very mainstream. But he falls all over himself in his short little essay about DeSantis and how wonderful he is, how effective he's been as governor. But pretty strong stuff. So I think we're in for a knockdown, drag-out sort of set of battles here in the next few years, and trying to get us through this and then coming out the other side as a stronger people, I think, is one of the greatest challenges we have as a country.
We're living through the January 6th hearings. We've already had one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think, obviously does it sway the hearts and minds of voters? Does it sway the hearts and mind of Merrick Garland? Do you see that making a difference politically? Obviously, it has to happen. It has to happen for history. Do you see it making a difference politically?
You mean these hearings?
The hearings. I mean, do you see it swaying any votes? Do you see it swaying, moving DOJ?
Well, I would be cautious about this because I was surprised by how large the audience was.
Yeah, it was over 20 million,
which suggests there was a group out there that was hungry for something different from what we're looking at. I think that group is basically in the middle. So I think there is some possibility it will change some minds. It will probably deepen the sense that Trump spells trouble. But to be honest, the answer is before the hearing started, I did not think they would make a difference. And they still don't have, in my judgment, the kind of bombshell or the kind of, they don't have the kind of, which is what we saw in Watergate. When we eventually did get evidence, it was just incontrovertible. That Nixon was at the center of a scandal, and he then had to go. And Republicans, as you'll recall, Howard Baker in particular, as a Republican senator, and Barry Goldwater too, they went to see Nixon and said, "You've got to resign. You have no choice but to resign." And that was because they had a smoking gun. I don't quite see what the smoking gun is yet with regard to Trump. I think there's a lot of smoldering around him. There's obviously a lot of evidence, circumstantial evidence, that he was in the middle of this thing, of this assault on the Capitol. But we don't have that conversation where he's telling somebody, do this, which is explicitly seen by most voters as, okay, that resolves it in my mind. He's absolutely guilty. Anti-Trump people concluded that a long time ago. But there are a number of people in the middle who were not convinced when these hearings started that Trump ought to go to jail. But it's the left, the hard left, that thinks, of course, he ought to go to jail. And that would be the best way to dispose of him, heading into the next elections. But we'll see where it comes out, Donny. I don't think we understand the electorate as a general proposition. I'm sure you have a very good handle on it. I don't feel that I have as an obvious a handle or as clear-cut a handle as I did when the Nixon tapes came out. Yeah. When it was just then, it was obvious the ship's going down. And I don't see the hearing so far as sort of sending that obvious message.
The biggest difference between then and now I see, and why so many of these problems, I don't want to say are unsolvable, but infinitely more difficult and why we will remain, I see, as two countries, is this little device here, where you can get whatever news you want, how you want it. It's an echo chamber. It's very hard to get, it's very hard to be a democratic-based society when the flow of news is now bespoke. And where that's really difficult to kind of move hearts and minds. And that's the thing that scares me, is this device right here.
I agree generally with that proposition, and I think that the capacity that social media provides, social media has turned out to be a two-edged sword. On one hand, it's given access to public discourse, national discourse, to millions of people who would feel like they're voiceless. I mean, that's a good thing. But the capacity and the growing commitment to creating false information and trying to persuade people of it has been extraordinarily successful. I mean, when it's basically convinced most of the Republican Party that against all we know, that Joe Biden was not legitimately elected, and they're bringing that view into the midterm elections. They're bringing that view into the 2024, and I think it makes it harder for Biden to govern. I think the evidence is overwhelmingly on the side of Biden was legitimately elected, and yet we're being pulled back by this disinformation. And this is just one of many examples now of how disinformation is increasing, not decreasing. The Russians, I will bet you the Russians are very heavily involved in ways we don't even yet understand, that our intelligence agencies are having a hard time keeping us all straight and knowing who's doing what to whom. But what I do think is we have a massive problem we haven't learned how to solve. And what it requires, I think, is the antidote to what we're going through is to have more publications and more people doing podcasts, as you are, who are trying to get to the truth and not just doing the propaganda side. We need to establish that the public has lost faith. They've lost trust in our leadership and in the institutions our leaders, run. And it's so important to get back on track with sort of honesty, with the kind of honesty, say, that a Gerald Ford brought to the office.
Yeah.
He wasn't the strongest president, wasn't the most muscular president, but at least you could trust him. And that's a step forward. So, I felt when watching the hearings the first night, it would have been helpful to the hearings in terms of establishing trust, if we'd had one or two people who were commentators who were, and I didn't see them, maybe I just missed them, were commentators who were pro-Trump.
Yeah.
That are going to give you the other perspective. And, I think that helps to establish the credibility of the left-leaning organizations if they give the right more, voice to sort of put alternative arguments out there and then take them head on. I mean, the search for truth ought to be something the Democrats are really good at. They run the academy, basically most universities, and they have access to many of the best minds of the future in the younger generation. So you can just see that that's a target audience, the younger target audience for people who want to spread this information.
Last question I'm going to ask you. You've been very generous with your time.
Sure.
The premise of this show is that kind of everything is a brand today. Every political party, every person. So what's the David Gergen brand?
Well, I hope it is one who is a calming voice and seeks to, what's the truth? I frequently have people come up to me, and they're very kind, and and I'm sure people who hate me don't sort of say hello in the same way. But I have a number of people come up to me and say, "You helped me get through this by helping me understand it and to treat it in a calmer way." Because I do I am in the school of, and I'm just sort of an amateur historian, but I am in the school of believing that America continues to have great promise, that we've been through huge challenges, existential challenges to the Republic before. You got to remember George Washington lost the first 6 out of 8 battles that his men were fighting. And we almost went over the brink then. We clearly almost self-destructed during the Civil War. We had the Great Depression. We had World War II, all existential threats. And we came through all of them. Abigail Adams wrote a very famous letter to her son, John Quincy, teenager, saying, "Adversity brings out the best in us. that in times of adversity, that's when you see real statesmen emerge. Well, we haven't seen very many of those statesmen so far, but I think she was on the right track, that this adversity, this period of time when we're so grim about the future and we're so discouraged about things, actually can be a time when we find new strength, that people will begin to emerge and say, this is unacceptable. We're not going to live like this. This is not sustainable. And I think a lot of young people are increasing in that category. I see lots and lots of young people, especially those who are coming home from Iraq and Afghanistan in military uniforms. They're like that World War II generation. I was soliloquizing earlier. I think the younger generation, young people coming back from military uniform, a lot of the young people who gave us, they're politics to the left of mine, but AOC or the not just the Occupy, but the Black Lives Matter organization, the Me Too movement, all of those were formed by young people in their 20s and 30s. And I don't agree with their politics frequently, but I celebrate the fact that they're in the arena. They're fighting for what they think America's future should be. That's healthy in a democracy. It's good to have people out on the streets. It's good to have people sort of voicing different views. And I think that will give us inner strength as we go forward in our own journey as a people.
David, I appreciate the book, which is spectacular, bestseller. Hearts Touched with Fire, How Great Leaders Are Made. Go out, get it, ravage it. It's a book that's right for the times. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. It was my privilege to be with you, Donny.
Right back at you. Stay healthy, okay?
Okay.
Bye-bye. Thank you for watching and listening to On Brand, the show of record for everything that is branding. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe anywhere you get podcasts, whether it's Spotify, whether it's Apple, or anywhere you get podcasts. Rate, review, or subscribe, or unsubscribe. And also watch our videos on YouTube. You can watch our videos there. You can subscribe to them. You can leave notes about them. We love when you watch. We love when you listen. We love you. Have a great week. We'll hear you, and we'll see you next week on On Brand. Everybody, thanks for watching. If you like it, hit that subscribe button. And we love having you here watching On Brand. And just don't miss any future episodes. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We'll see you next time.